To get more easy setup tips for your Fortigate firewall, subscribe now and don't forget to click on the bell notification and you won't miss anything. So you've got your new Fortigate and you're new to Fortigate firewalls. What do you need to do? You have probably connected your Fortigate using a network cable to your computer and configured it. Fortigate appliances comes with at least port one of the ports, which is usually port 1, that is already configured with the IP address of 192.168.199. You need to configure your PC subnet to be on that same subnet, get to the IP address of the interface, of the port 1 interface, and from there you're actually starting to configure your Fortigate. Now you can configure a Fortigate using the graphical user interface, which has many features. It even has a feature visibility feature in the system settings so that you can disable or enable new features which are not available over here. Now you can configure your Fortigate using the graphical user interface, and you can configure it using the command line. Fortigate experts use the command line almost all of the time. We will look at the command line, but we will make our way using the graphical user interface. To get to the command line, you need to click here. It is actually a JavaScript app that runs on top the admin web app. Probably the first thing that you want to do is to write down get system status so you can see your Fortigate serial number, which ASICs, which accelerated hardware does it support. Are you using a hard disk or a flash drive? The current security profile database, and so on. Now, we went into the interfaces. You probably have one interface that you're connected to, which will be the management interface. Now, you need to connect one of your WAN interface to your ISP, either through a modem router, or you can use your Fortigate as the router itself. Each interface has a physical switchboard that you can connect to different subnets in your network. Now let's just edit one interface. Let's see what's inside. You can name your interface according to the subnet in your local area network. Let's assume that we have a management subnet. All right, now you can define it a specific role. It can be a WAN, a DMZ, an undefined role, or a WAN. So let's use the LAN. So now we know that we have a management LAN connected to port 8 on our Fortigate. Now, the addressing mode can be manual, it can be DHCP. Let's use the manual option and let's configure it to be 192.168.2.1/24 since we're using a 24 subnet. Now, this address is the gateway interface address. So any computer that will connect to one of to port 8 will get an IP address in that subnet, that is the 192.168.2.0 subnet, but its gateway address will be 2.1. Now we will also open the Dhcp server, so anyone that is connected, there's a pool of IP address that it will grab. We'll look at DHCP server very soon. Before that, we need to configure administrative access. Which protocol will support administrative access? We'll just use HTTPS and HTTP. For now, we can also use SSH. We can also configure it to support pings from host in that subnet or from a Forti manager, but we will not do it right now. LDP is a protocol that enables discovery between devices in the network. It doesn't really matter. You can disable or keep it for now. Now we have a DHCP server. As I said, any client that connects to that port will receive one of the IP addresses from the pool. You don't have to use all the pool. You can use only 20 IP addresses. You can keep the DNS server the same as configured here, or you can specify your own DNS server. Let's just specify Google's DNS server. You can control the list time, and if you click on the advanced, if you have a DHCP server that is part of your domain, which is not your Fortigate or your Fortigate interface, you can configure its IP address here, and then whenever a packet arrives on that interface, it will head over to the DHCP server. But for now, we're using the gateway interface as the DHCP server. You can configure an NTP server. You can configure, and this option is for more advanced users, DHCP scopes or options. And you can assign different IPs to different devices based on their MAC address. Another option is device detection. Device detections allows your Fortigate to detect which device and which operating system devices on the networks belongs to. This is one of the things that you should keep enabled. Don't bother with the explicit web proxy. You can enable a captive portal, so if you have outsourced employees and you wish to jump a landing page with user credentials, you can also do that, but we will skip it for now. So this is the basic configuration of the interface. Okay. So now we have a management interface. We have another interface, which is the WAN interface that you connect it. You connect it to your ISP router. We will call it WAN1. The role is WAN. We can use DHCP, and if we want to make it more reliable, we will use a static IP address. So my gateway interface is 10.0.3.75, and my router is actually 10.0.3.1. I've enabled HTTP and HTTPS, and as you can see, you don't have a DHCP server whenever the role of your interface is WAN. That is one of the best practices when using an interface as a WAN interface. Okay, so we have a management interface, we have a WAN interface. Now we want to make our managers that are connected to that port, which is port 8, to get out to the internet. So the next thing to do is to configure a policy. Now we will configure a very basic policy, which is a full access policy. Let's name it. Let's name it managers 1. And the incoming interface is management. That's the LAN interface of our managers. The outgoing interface is WAN1. That is the interface that is connected to our ISP router. That is the interface that takes them outside of the LAN towards the internet. Now, when it comes to source, for this video, let's make it very generic. Anyone can go. Anyone. We can configure user groups and different users. We can also configure sets of parameters that control the different users. But for now, as for source, anyone can get out. As for destination, they can go just about anywhere. We can also create specific objects that will allow them to go to specific places, but for now, they can go just about anywhere. As for scheduling, we're not limiting them to specific hours or days. So as for scheduling, again, they can get out to the internet any time of the day. As for service, we can deny them from getting out in specific services such as FTP, but for now, for our specific policy, we will let them use just about any service. Now, the action is accept. We can also create a policy that will deny specific services or specific users from getting out or from doing specific things. For now, the action is accept. Inspection mode is another topic that we will look into. That is the inspection that is done to our networks when we're using security profiles such as antivirus or IPS. For now, we will keep it at flow-based mode. Now, we will use NAT. NAT is Network Address Translation. That is our private IP address, which can be 192.168.2.6, will be translated to your Fortigate or to your ISP public internet address. Now, we will not use security profiles. You know what? Let's use antivirus. Let's use the default profile, the default antivirus profile. We will use certificate inspection. When we use certificate inspection, your Fortigate checks the different fields that are coming from server certificates to see if they're valid, if it doesn't have any mismatches, and so on. The last thing is to use our logging options. We can log only security events, but we will log all sessions. So later on, we can look at the login report and see what our users or what our host did. Okay. So we have a managers one policy. We have two interfaces. The WAN1, which connects us to the outsides, and the management interface, which managers in our company can connect to and get their IP addresses. That was the second step. Now, the third step is to configure a static route. A static route is actually, for our usage, will be a default route. That is, I've already configured one, so let's just look at it. If you want to create new, you just create new. So default route actually tells your Fortigate that whenever he sees a packet, any packet that is destined to any place which doesn't have a route at the routing table, it will route it towards the WAN interface. And the WAN interface address is a 10.0.3.1. Remember, my ISP router has that address. Now you can use specific parameters as distance. You can use priority. It just tells me that I already have that static route, which I do. And once we have a static route, a policy, and the interfaces that are configured correctly, we can now connect our host to the management interface, and those hosts can now get onto the internet. Let's just move to the CLI, and let's see how do we configure interfaces using the CLI. So for the sake of our purpose, let's configure port 7. So using the CLI, we will use the config system interface. Now let's edit port 7 as we said. Let's set its IP to 192.168.4.1 with a subnet of 24. Let's set the management protocols to HTTP and HTTPS. And what else? We can use many more. If you will look at the, let's end it. Now I want to show you something. When you config system interface, let's just get out here. Config system interface, and if we look at port 1, for example, we can use the show full config, and as you can see, there are dozens of features of configurations that you can add. For our sake, we have only enabled the IP address on that interface, and let's look at it. Let's just refresh our page. Port 7, and there it is. Now we can also configure the Dhcp server and so on. We have not done so on our CLI. The last thing I want to show you, once you get into your Fortigate, you're actually the Fortigate administrators. Now you have two types of administrators on, actually you have more than two types, but the two most common types is a super admin, which is you. You have privileges to just about anything. You can read and write, and you can create another type of administrator, which is the professional admin, where you can actually enable it, different read and write privileges on the different places on your Fortigate. If you will head over to the CLI and use the config system admin, and you can edit the admin name. I have two admins. I have one which is the super admin, and the second one which is offer test, which is my second admin. So now let's look at the different configurations that you can add to your admin. Again, lots of configuration. That's not the only place where you can configure different things. You can also configure it on a globally, which is the config system global. But one of the things that I wanted to show you is that you can strengthen your admin account by using a trusted host. So you can also look at it here. sorry, here, you can configure a trusted host, that is a trusted IP address that only your admin can get from. So you can configure the IP address on your office at your work, and you can configure another trusted host, which is the IP address at your home. Only from those two IP addresses your admin can get into the Fortigate. You can also configure two-factor authentication, which is also a very common security procedure. You can use FortiToken, and you can also use your email as a two-factor authentication. Let's just show you how to do so. Let's clear that out. So we can use the config system admin set. No, let's edit the profile before and set two-factor email, set email to, and let's set it to one of my Gmail accounts. Let's end it, and now if we'll go back to our admin profile, let's view it again, and you can see that you can now use an email-based two-factor authentication.